Hello, my name is Christina King, and I am doing my research presentation on Phyllis Wheatley's poem on being brought from Africa to America. This is my table of contents. I will start off with the biography, and then I will have the poem read to you all by myself. There will be a summary of the poem, then there will be themes, and my last page of the presentation will be the works cited page. So Phyllis's life began in West Africa in 1753. She was sold into slavery at the age of 8, and she was brought over to the New England colonies in 1761. She was purchased by John Wheatley of Boston, Massachusetts, as a gift for his wife as a personal slave. The Wheatley family took great interest in Phyllis's education. They taught her how to read and write by the age of 9. And she was able to master Greek and Latin. And they also taught her the Bible and introduced her to Christianity. She wrote acclaimed poetry by the age of 13, and she also wrote a poem called On the Death of Reverend George Whitefield, which was published in cities such as Boston, New York, Philadelphia, and it was also published in London. Her first volume of book of poems was published in 1773 in London, and it was called Poems on Various Subjects and Religious Morale. Phyllis also traveled to London with Nathaniel Wheatley in 1771 after her doctor said that a sea voyage, might help her and improve her health. When she went to London, she was highly acclaimed and well received. She was free between 1774 and 1778. There's no exact timeline of when she was freed, but scholars believe it happened between that time period. After the Whitleys died, Phyllis was left to support herself. She did so as a seamstress and a poet. She married John Peters in 1778, who was a grocery store worker, and together they had 3 children, who all died young. Phyllis continued to write, and she would go out and look for people to help publish her books, but she could not raise the money, so she began soliciting subscribers. But this did not help. She still was unable to find people to help publish her books because of the war and the economy at that time. So she ended up writing her last volume of books, which included 33 poems and 13 letters, but it was never published. Phyllis died at the age of 31 on December 5th, 1785, and it's believed that many of her last poems have disappeared and never been recovered. On being brought from Africa to America, 'twas mercy brought me from my pagan land, taught me beneath soul to understand that there's a God, that there's a Savior too. Once I redemption neither sought nor knew. Some view our sable race with scornful eye, their color is a diabolic dye. Remember, Christians, Negroes, black as Cain, may be refined and joineth Anglic's train. So the first 2 lines of the poem are, 'twas mercy brought me from my pagan land, taught me beneath soul to understand. So in the poem, Whitley really wants to praise and talk about her ideas of Christianity, her salvation, and history. She writes, brought me from my pagan land. Here she is speaking on that she's a slave that was brought from Africa to America, and this was done by mercy. Mercy is what converted her to Christianity, and she knew never knew anything of Christianity or of God or of the Bible while she was in Africa. So even though she is African and is viewed negatively to be an African in her time, the second half of her poem reflects that her belief is that anyone, whether a slave, whether white, whether a Negro, anyone can be saved by joining Christianity. And she feels like mercy is responsible for taking her from Africa and enlightening her soul. The next two lines are that there's a God, that there's a Savior too. Once I redemption neither sought nor knew. In this portion of the poem, Willie states that Mercy taught her that God is real, God does exist, and that God saves. She has a sincere tone, and she again emphasizes on the difference between pagan and savior. Phyllis feels like she was taken from her pagan land and was taught that there's a God and that he can save her. Her savior is referred to either as God or could be Jesus. And since God was already mentioned beforehand, it's easy to say that she used a double meaning to interpret that she is also referring to Jesus Christ. Some view our sable race with scornful eye. Their color is a diabolic dye. These lines of the poem, Whitley uses the word sable to refer to her race. And she also says our sable, in which she is talking about all Africans that were brought from Africa to America. She really wants to convince other slaves to convert to Christianity and to believe in God and to believe in his word. And so she uses her own life as an example of how to change from a quote unquote pagan African with no God, with no Christianity to a saved Christian. She writes in the second line, their color is a diabolic dye, that and that's spoken from what we can believe is spoken from a white racist America. Even though she doesn't clearly state this, but she does say that it's only some, and she also admits that there are others in society who view blacks negatively. She states that there, is racism during her time period, and that they look at her with a scornful, evil eye. They look at her as if she's beneath them, or that she's different, or not good enough. Remember Christians, Negroes black as Cain, may be refined and join in angelic train. In this last portion of the poem, Whitley addresses her audience, which are Christians and Negroes. She lumps them together in one group, saying that they're all one. And she reminds them that this is for you all. I'm addressing you all. She also uses the word Cain, and it is believed that she is referring to Cain from the Bible. And she's reminding us of the story of Cain and Abel, where Cain murdered his brother Abel. And when God began to look for Abel and asked Cain where Abel was, Cain replied to him by saying, am I my brother's keeper? So of course, God knew that Cain killed Abel, and he was upset with him. And this was known as one of the first murders in human history. And God leaves a mark upon Cain as part of his punishment. So Cain begins to worry that he'll get murdered because of the mark. And God tells him, no, only I can be the punisher and the maker of these decisions. And God continues to protect Cain, even though he has committed a murder. So she could be referring to Negroes, quote unquote, black as Cain, because they are separated from God. But in Africa, they do not know of Christianity. They do not know of God, And so she's saying that Negroes or Africans at that time are separated from God, just as Cain was. So there are a couple themes that are hit on in this poem. Of course, race is a major theme, and Wheatley acknowledges race and the racial tensions in America between whites and blacks. She addresses her belief in inequality and equality and among the races throughout the poem, and she also explains how her transition and conversion to Christianity is proof that everyone is equal, regardless of their skin color. Another theme that is hit is religion, and even though Phyllis is far from her original home, Willie found a spiritual home in her new faith and religion. Her transition to Christianity coincides with her transition from Africa to America. She's pretty much saying it's like one and the same. And she believes that all people are equal spiritually, and she wants Christians to truly follow their Christian principles and beliefs and the imagery of Christianity to discuss racial inequality and to use this to diffuse the assumptions of race and differences during her time. Prejudice is another theme that is hit on in this poem. Willie was brought as a slave into a racist culture. She doesn't focus primarily on racism in the poem, but she does address prejudice against blacks in America and how faith in God can overcome that prejudice. Willie doesn't exactly express her identity in this poem as well, but it is known that this is one of her few autobiographical poems that was published. So it's interesting to read how she was treated as something problematic, and she resolved this problem through her faith. Of course, being a slave was difficult for her, it was a burden for her, but she creates an inspiring message of hope against racism through her Christianity and through her faith.